How's it going, everybody? We are Cranky Films. Today we are back, finally. It's been forever. We are back with Alien Biospheres Part 4 by Biblaridion. Woo. I enjoyed this series. Sorry it took so long, boys and ladies. We're back. We're ready. We're going on the land, bros. Last time, right? They split, right?
Yeah.
We got two different life forms. We got some. They're on the ground, under the water. Then we got some that whim.
We got legs.
We got legs.
We got fins.
Yep, fins.
Okay, and then we learned about...
We got appendages.
We learned about predators and prey.
Yep. We learned that they release sperm into the water.
It's called beer.
Part 4.
I could hear everyone unsubscribing.
I'm trying to net fish.
Already unsubscribed.
Last time, our two ancestral body plans diversified into different clades to fill the niches of the ancient oceans. But now, 100 million years after the body plans first appeared, the stage is at last set for their descendants to emerge from the sea and take the first steps onto dry land. So far, all life on our alien planet has been restricted to the water, and for good reason. At this point in history, dry land represents an extreme habitat and poses a huge challenge to potential colonists. If an animal comes out onto land, there will obviously be no water to swim through, and so it will be unable to support itself, and so collapse and die.
Yeah.
Not only that, but outside of the ocean, any water in the animal's body will quickly evaporate through its skin, and so the animal will dehydrate, desiccate, and die.
Oh no.
Not to mention the fact that, as of yet, there's no food outside the ocean, so any animal that comes onto the land will starve and die. So dry land seems like a pretty inhospitable place, and yet, on Earth, it's been colonized innumerable times by a huge diversity of different clades. The most obvious examples being the forerunners of tetrapods and terrestrial arthropods that came onto land hundreds of millions of years ago, but also including more recent examples like mudskippers, air-breathing catfish, and terrestrial sea slugs. So why have all of these different groups come onto land despite the numerous difficulties involved? The simple answer is a lack of competition.
True.
The oceanic ecosystems are already thoroughly colonized, so the marine species must compete furiously to obtain food and avoid predators. But if a species comes onto land, especially at such an early stage in the history of multicellular life, there'll be no other species to compete with and no predators to worry about. So selective pressures will pretty much inevitably drive organisms to come ashore. However, going from wholly aquatic to totally terrestrial would be a very drastic change in lifestyle, but fortunately, the transition doesn't have to be so immediate. The intertidal zone...
What do you think makes them want to go on land?
Lack of food.
You think?
Yeah.
But okay, it's just they would be the first life forms on land, so they would still have a lack of food regardless. They obviously had more food under the water because you had other species that were there so that they could eat and kill and be predators too. But like, these are probably the weaker species trying to go on land then.
Yeah.
Maybe they just wander.
Wander?
Yeah.
I think that they evolved eventually to feel the need to go on land. And they then are also given the ability to go on land.
It's probably this. They already live by the shore. So those of them that washed up on shore and lived long enough to go back into the water to have kids, just naturally have that resistance to land, so it just happened over time. Because they were already prone to get washed up on shore anyways. So it was just a bunch of coincidences. That led into them being on, oh, I get on land. That's the water.
Well, that makes sense.
Pretty much it.
Eventually, because they went over, right, herbivores and carnivores? No, not yet.
No, not fully, because most of them are just like they barely introduced predators last episode at the end of the episode.
Yeah.
So
because I imagine the first ones that go on land are probably herbivores.
100.
Well, yeah.
Well, yeah, because there's nothing else living on land except for a bunch of plants.
Insect types, maybe?
I suppose, yeah.
Because
I'm sure there's already flying insects.
But there's also
Maybe.
plantation growth.
Plantations.
Plantation.
You think that there's already established plantations?
Not that, like actual flowers and stuff like that. Not a plantation. I
They-
know what you. I kn-
First ones on land, they go and they see a farm.
Like, damn.
Oh, dude.
Look at that plantation.
Dude, that's heat. Wow.
Oh my god, I got confused.
There's
Sorry
only
about that.
and there's like maybe like not that much green light, let alone a plantation. Man, I had a whole tractor up there.
Yeah, I mean, you think, right, a lot of the trees and whatnot grow because seeds get spread from other insects and birds
Yeah,
and
but
whatnot.
no trees happened yet.
No trees have happened yet.
No.
Are you sure?
Remember, the land is still dry.
Are you sure?
It just said the land is super.
Are you sure? I'm
Yes.
sorry, I'm just trying to think about, like, real life. The trees had to be there before the first thing what came on land.
No.
But
Where did
life
the
was-
seeds come from?
this-
Did they just make the seeds for the trees and the plants and the grass?
Yeah, how did the tree first come into Earth?
God, if you believe in that, or the other things, every other thing.
Okay,
Yeah.
what came first, the chicken or the egg?
That's not right. The egg.
We're having.
What came first, the oak tree or the birch tree?
That's it's insane. I have no idea. I'm trying. No, think about it. Regardless of what you believe in, Earth was there, right? It was, of course, it came about somehow, but Earth is here now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And when you have species that come from water, because also our evolution things started in water as well, right? They came onto a land that had to have had trees. Because how in the world are the seeds for these plants going to just appear out of nowhere?
They appeared.
How, so they were there already.
No.
How, huh?
Look at okay, in this case,
Grass had to be there.
In this specific,
Because there's no way that
in this
there's
planet,
no way. Okay, this
this
planet,
planet,
our
right
planet,
here,
right,
FR
had to have had trees and
Really?
rocks and
Really?
rocks and rocks and stuff.
Yeah,
Our planet, look,
develop a rock.
there's just no way
Yeah, crazy
that
like that.
grass and trees wasn't here first, because there's no way for these sea creatures to evolve, come on land, and just invent an apple tree seed.
They're not.
Bet.
It
Bet.
Bet.
it just naturally happened.
Yeah, so it's there.
The first tree came from nothing.
Yeah, so it was there before they came on land. That, huh?
A tree
Flowers.
seed wasn't there before the tree was fucking created.
No, duh. Trees were just there. Their trees were just there.
Okay.
Because there's no way they're going to come on land and they're going to be like, you know what? I'm hungry. I'm a herbivore now. I want to eat trees. Let me invent a tree seed to plant this so that I can eat from the
They're
tree.
eating seaweed.
Eating seaweed.
Seaweed was there as well.
Maybe the
Changed
first.
spawn after the temperature heated up the volume.
Maybe
The microorganism happened.
Dude, what do you
and
think?
the
Please tell me what you
explosion
think.
Can
Think
the
about
plant life come from the ocean as well?
yeah,
If it keeps washing off.
what if
onto the
it's
side.
deep? Like our middle states, specifically, right? For example, let's say Nebraska is nowhere near
Wind.
the ocean. Wind is nowhere near Nebraska. Is nowhere near the ocean,
Some seeds fly.
right? Yeah, they do. They migrate and trees get planted, right? But what did the bird have to eat to poop out the tree seed?
Well, it's out in the.
They had to
it's in
eat
the outer
from the
parts
plant
first.
that produced the seed.
The
There's
birds
no
are in the outer
birds in
parts,
this
and then
universe
once the birds are there, now they fly inland.
No, because you guys gotta think trees were
Okay,
there
we're losing the
before
plot.
evolution. No, we're not losing the plot. We're
We're
staying
losing-
on the plot. We're just evolving.
We're evolving it too much. Then.
No, devolving. We're pushing a we whatever, bro.
Right now,
Whatever.
there's no tree.
There has to
There's
be.
no tree.
Okay.
There's no tree.
Well, then where did it come from? Do you think there's gonna be trees?
yes.
How?
It's
You think that they're just going to invent a tree seed?
No, it'll be cactus.
Cactus. Cactuses are there.
It's the same way that these animals are evolving. Their environment's gonna change. The ozone layer is gonna happen.
I know that
Then-
trees can evolve, and I know that plants evolve into other things. I know that. I know that's a fact. But what did it evolve from?
The only explanation would be if it's coming from the ocean.
How would it... Explain it then!
It gets washed onto the sides and it just goes
But how did the
along
ones in the ocean, how are they invented?
Finish! What?
Let's go.
sometimes called the littoral zone, forms a perfect medium between land and water. Organisms living in this zone will become exposed as the tide ebbs, and so will benefit from adaptations that allow them to survive until the tide returns. Over many generations, individuals that are able to survive out of the water for longer will enjoy less competition and will thus be selected for, until they're ultimately able to live entirely on land. Luckily for our alien life forms, their planet's large moon means that the high tide will be almost 3 times higher than Earth's, creating a large intertidal zone that will allow for a very gradual transition to terrestrial life. However, there's still no reason to go further than the high water mark if there's no food outside the sea. While this will halt the progress of the animals, it won't be a problem for the autotrophs, who can produce their own food, so they'll be the first organisms to make the jump to a permanently land-dwelling existence.
I have a feeling I'm gonna get destroyed by somebody.
You all get demolished in the day.
I'm sorry.
Please, someone.
No, because I was thinking, right, like, yeah, one of the species that was first invented was a more plant-like type of kelp. And you're probably right that it didn't probably wash up onto the thing. And then one of the other creatures ate it and it spread. Right? That's probably factual.
That or it grew, and when they evolved the animals, then the birds, when they
But do you think that the redwood, the tall redwood trees came from an underwater species of like
Dinosaur.
kelp? Dinosaur?
The dinosaur pooped it out.
The dinosaur pooped out the entire tree.
Ouch.
On Earth,
Ah.
terrestrial autotrophs consist almost exclusively of phototrophs, most notably the plants. But on our alien planet, we also have chemotrophs that gain energy from oxidizing hydrogen sulfide. Up until now, we've assumed that these autotrophs have remained relatively simple and unspecialized, mostly existing as plankton or other basal organisms. But over the past few 100 million years, as the animals have been diversifying, the autotrophs will have been evolving as well. Perhaps one kingdom of chemotrophs evolves to cluster together to form colonies and ultimately become full-fledged multicellular life forms. Since hydrogen sulfide dissolves in water, these organisms can only carry out chemosynthesis when they're in contact with the atmosphere, and so they may form large rafts or mats that float on the ocean's surface. If some of these rafts specialize to live in the intertidal zone, they'll be out of reach of many pelagic predators such as the large filter-feeding acanthopods. At low tide, they'll be exposed to the atmosphere, allowing them to take in hydrogen sulfide, and at high tide, they'll take in water to stave off dehydration.
Okay.
As they evolve to become increasingly terrestrial, their outer membranes will thicken to better retain water. However, making the membrane waterproof will also make it harder for hydrogen sulfide to pass through it, so these organisms may evolve specialized pores or stomata that can be opened to take in hydrogen sulfide and closed to prevent water loss. These stomata may connect to a layer of vascular tissue that transports the hydrogen sulfide to every cell in the organism. Also, recall that these organisms produce elemental sulfur as a byproduct of their chemosynthesis, so these stomata may secrete excess sulfur to prevent it from building up in their tissues. This means a coating of sulfur will gradually accumulate on their cuticles, which will get washed away as the tide comes in. When it comes to reproduction, these chemotrophs will need to tackle the usual problems faced by sessile
I
organisms.
don't like that.
Their colonial ancestors may have reproduced asexually, perhaps by budding or fragmentation. If the terrestrial forms inherit this mode of reproduction, they'll be able to colonize unsettled areas of the shorelines very quickly. But at higher population densities, they may be incentivized to switch to sexual reproduction to increase genetic diversity and give them an edge over the competition. In such a case, they may grow gametangia, specialized organs that produce gametes, which are then released into the air in huge quantities, very similar to the broadcast spawning used by sessile marine creatures like the anthostomes. However, while in the water, gametes can drift among the currents more or less indefinitely, and so will have a considerable span of time to encounter other gametes, on land, without the density of water to keep them buoyant, the gametes won't remain airborne for long, and once they reach the ground, they'll die very quickly. One way of alleviating this problem is to have fertilization take place within the gametangium itself. The male gametes are released immediately, while the female gametes are withheld until a male gamete lands on the gametangium. The two
Okay.
gametes then merge to form a spore, which is then dispersed and can immediately begin growing into a new organism once it lands. These will be some of the first ever terrestrial life forms, forming sulfur-coated carpets of lichen-like
This is so
crust
cool.
growing over the rocks and sand.
I want
Very
one of
interesting.
But as they begin to populate the
Give me one of the
coastlines,
pets.
they'll
Okay.
pave the way for other colonists.
You wake up and
Like the
all over your
chemotrophs,
house.
the phototrophs will need to access the atmosphere in order to take in carbon dioxide, which dissolves in water, and so they'll mostly live near the water's surface. These organisms, though, gain energy from chemical reactions that occur between sunlight and the photosynthetic pigments in their cells.
There's the first tree.
Among phototrophs on Earth, the
Mhm.
dominant plant kingdom and the related clades of green algae use chlorophyll for photosynthesis, giving them their characteristic green color, while other clades of algae make use of a multitude of other pigments, each one gaining energy from a different portion of the spectrum of light produced by the sun. Our alien planet star is a class GV star, just like Earth's sun, so it will produce a similar spectrum, meaning the various kingdoms of phototrophs will show a similar variety of pigments to those on Earth. Let's say there's a class of algae on this planet that uses a red pigment for photosynthesis, and that one clade of these algae specializes for life in the intertidal zone. Once again, any individuals that are left exposed at low tide are at risk of desiccating. But instead of evolving their own mechanisms to resist dehydration, they may simply take advantage of the abundant colonies of chemotrophs that already cover the shore. By incorporating themselves inside the membranes of the chemotrophs, the algae can rely on their host's toughened cuticles to protect them from desiccation. This will also provide them with extra nutrients, as they can take up the sulfur and water given off as waste products by the chemotroph. Since they now rely on the chemotroph for nutrients and shelter, it's in the algae's best interests to make sure that their host stays alive and healthy, so they may evolve to provide the chemotroph with a portion of the glucose they produce from photosynthesis, which is more chemically efficient than the formaldehyde that the chemotrophs produce. This sort of symbiosis between phototrophs and other organisms happens often in evolution. Corals rely on photosynthetic zooxanthellae to provide them with sugars in return for minerals and carbon dioxide. Lichens consist of a photosynthetic alga that shares the sugar it produces with the fungus that shelters it, and about 80% of all plant species have fungal or bacterial symbiotes in their root systems to aid in nitrogen fixation and acquiring minerals from the soil.
Wow.
However, this partnership poses a difficulty when it comes to reproduction. Whenever the chemophyte reproduces, it will need to ensure some of its algal symbiotes are transferred to its offspring, so when it grows a female gametangium, some algae may migrate inside and attach themselves to the gametes. When a male gamete lands within the gametangium and fertilizes the female gamete, the algae will be released with the spore as part of a pre-packaged dispersal unit, or diaspore. And once the diaspore lands and the new plant begins growing, the algae will multiply asexually to fill the chemotroph's tissues. I'm going to dub these symbiotic organisms chemophytes, although for simplicity I'll be referring to them informally as plants from now on, even though technically they're not plants in the strictest sense. The carbon dioxide these plants need for photosynthesis will be supplied by the respiration of animals and aerobic microorganisms, while the hydrogen sulfide for chemosynthesis is given off by organic decomposition and by sulfur-reducing microbes. As these plants proliferate, they'll cause the atmospheric proportions of these gases to steadily decline, and oxygen levels to rise. Once they become fully terrestrial, they may increase their structural complexity. To take up as much sunlight, carbon dioxide, and hydrogen sulfide as possible,
That's a leaf.
they'll benefit from a large surface area,
That
which,
is a
once
leaf.
again, in accordance with the square cube law, will favor a thin, flat shape, which is part of the reason why the leaves of plants on Earth are shaped the way they are. However, large leaves will also have a high air resistance, increasing their likelihood of being damaged by the wind. This can be mitigated by having spaces within or between the leaves for wind to pass through, which may take the form of a branching structure.
It's a tree.
For maximum exposure to sunlight, they may evolve stems or stalks that grow upwards towards the sun. The tallest plants will have the best access to light, and so an arms race will then ensue, with plants growing taller and taller, eventually evolving into forms that might be called trees.
Wow.
Since there are no terrestrial herbivores as of yet, these trees may spread uninhibited across the landscape, forming vast forests of uninterrupted greenery. or perhaps reddery, I suppose.
Murdery.
And as the plants establish themselves on land, they'll present a new food
What an
source that may
outlier.
coax the animals into taking their first steps out of water. The sessile anthostomes rely on the ocean currents to bring them food, meaning they can't feed above the waterline,
Yeah.
so the land won't have very much to offer them. But the motile tentaclostomes stand much more to gain from making landfall.
I'm gonna try
Perhaps
to
some
snail.
tentaclostome species come into the intertidal
It's a
zone
kind
to
of
spawn,
turtle.
as the shallows and tide pools form an ideal shelter for their developing larvae. These coastal species may evolve to supplement
Is it
their
a turtle
diet
or a
by
crab?
feeding on the chemophytes along the shore, and eventually be enticed out of the intertidal zone by the abundance of food offered by the land plants. Initially, they'll need to constantly return to the water to prevent desiccation. In particular, their gills are especially vulnerable to drying out. While in the water, a large surface area allowed increased oxygen uptake, on land it means a greater area for water to evaporate through, so having a large breathing surface is now a detriment. Recall, though, that the tentaclostomes are capable of retracting their limbs, so the gills may be withdrawn into the body when not in use,
Nails.
minimizing their exposure to the air and preventing water loss. And as the tentaclostomes become increasingly terrestrial, perhaps their gills evolve to become permanently retracted into pockets within the body, somewhat like a pair of lungs. Air passes into these
Cool.
lungs through spiracles or pneumostomes on the creature's sides, and the muscles at the base of the lungs may become a
Hearts?
pair of hearts to pump the oxygenated blood
Two
around the
hearts?
body. Since this
Yeah.
passive form of breathing relies on a constant flow of oxygen-rich air into the lungs, the energy they get from respiration will be directly proportional to the levels of atmospheric oxygen. The less oxygen available, the less energy they'll have to maintain their growth, and so will have an upper limit on the size they can reach before their volume becomes too large to sustain. This is one reason why terrestrial arthropods on Earth don't get larger than a few kilograms at the most, as they rely on a similar mechanism of passive respiration. Luckily, though, the proliferation of the land plants will steadily oxygenate the atmosphere, allowing these tentaclostomes to attain fairly large sizes. However, their maximum size will still be limited by their lack of internal support structures. To help them locomote on land, their fins may lose their hydrodynamic specializations and evolve into simple feet made of pure muscle. This is very inefficient and energetically demanding, as the muscles will need to be tensed continuously to keep the body supported. Beyond a certain weight, this becomes impractical, posing
Those
another
aren't
limit
into an
on the
elephant.
potential size. Although recall this planet's
It'll have to
gravity
be a
is
turtle.
20% lower than Earth's, so this constraint won't be quite as severe
Or a
as it would
crab.
be for animals on Earth. The only structural support the tentaclostomes have is their shell. The shells of marine anthostomes are made of calcium sulfate, which they form by taking in minerals dissolved in the seawater. However, there's obviously no dissolved minerals in air, so forming a calcium sulfate shell on land may be infeasible. On Earth, the various groups of arthropods have independently invaded land numerous times, and in almost every instance have lost the mineral component of their shells, forsaking the ancestral calcium carbonate shell for one primarily formed of chitin. Our terrestrial tentaclostomes may do the same, turning their mineralized shell into a lighter, more flexible substance. Since the shell is impermeable to water, it helps prevent desiccation, which may also be averted by evolving a thick, waterproof skin, allowing them to venture out of the water indefinitely. However, they'll still be tied to the water for reproduction. Just as with the chemophytes,
wow.
the tentaclostomes'
That
gametes
sounds-
and larvae are prone to desiccation on land, so the tentaclostomes will need to return to the water to spawn, and their larvae will need to
Like
remain in the
bugs.
water until they develop the
They run
waterproof
this
skin
ocean.
and air-breathing capabilities of
Like
the
their banana.
adults. To become totally independent of the water and colonize drier habitats, the terrestrial
It looks like
tentaclostomes will
an
need
egg.
to evolve internal fertilization. With this reproductive innovation, instead of the male and female expelling gametes into the water and having the larvae develop on their own, the male will transfer his gametes
Dang.
into
Dude,
the
they look like
female's
the
body
blood.
through what's called a
God.
cloacal kiss. The female will then contain the fertilized eggs within an oviduct, where they'll develop a waterproof outer casing that allows them to be laid on land without desiccating. This will also dramatically increase reproductive efficiency, as while within the oviduct, the eggs will be protected from predation and adverse conditions until they reach a suitable
that
stage of
for
development.
reproductive?
Yeah.
Note
And
that
her-
this
the front of
strategy
her face?
closely
Yes,
mirrors the
it's mixed it up.
reproductive adaptations of the
Okay.
terrestrial chemophytes. which similarly carry out fertilization within the relative safety of the female gametangium. No longer reliant on the water to reproduce, these tentaclostomes may now push inland, undergoing further specializations for their new terrestrial habitats along the way. To cope with a varied diet, the setae on their feeding arms may evolve into rasping surfaces, like the radulae of gastropods, while their stomach may develop a branching structure to increase surface area, as well as a number of ceca, or pouches to store digested food, which when full will then evert back into the stomach so waste can be regurgitated. These tentaclostomes will be the first true land animals, and are set to spread across the continent to occupy the abundant niches of the new terrestrial ecosystems. I'll call these creatures lophostomes. But though they may have won the race to land, they'll shortly be followed by other colonists.
They're gonna win the space race.
Among the polypods, the planktonic tachypods rely on the ocean currents for movement, so they may not fare well out of water, and the acanthopods are very specialized for aquatic life.
Birds.
But the sarcopods may be adaptable enough to make the transition to a terrestrial existence. By this point, the chemophytes may grow into large coastal swamps around the mouths of rivers and estuaries, where the sarcopods might come to spawn or scavenge. As they evolve to inhabit shallower waters, their eyes might move towards their dorsal surface to allow them to see above the waterline, a common condition found in many semi-aquatic animals. Vertebrates on Earth have only 2 eyes, which provide a fairly narrow range of vision regardless of how they're positioned. This may have contributed to the evolution of the neck, which allows for the head and the eyes attached to it to be aimed in different directions to take in visual information over a wider range. Having a neck also allows for the mouth to be brought closer to food without moving the entire body, which conserves energy and makes feeding easier. The sarcopods, on the other hand, have 6 eyes that grant a much greater field of vision without needing to be repositioned, and they have anterior limbs that can be used to reach for food and pass it into the mouth, so evolving a neck may not be necessary.
I think they're gonna turn
Instead of having a
How big
head
is
distinct
20
from the
centimeters?
body,
How long?
Meters?
Yeah, 20 centimeters. How long is that?
I don't even know. What is a centimeter? Is that?
How many centimeters is 1 inch?
Why are you talking to me about this? I'm not the guy.
Yeah,
champ.
you're not the math guy.
I'm not the guy.
Not that guy.
He's the guy.
Are you that guy?
How much is an inch?
An inch.
An inch is like
An
that.
inch.
An
I
inch
know.
is
I
like
know.
right here.
Yeah. How much is a centimeter? You want to talk about it? Let's talk about it. What are we done?
You don't have it really.
How long is a meter?
Which one?
Meters.
Which one's longer, a meter or a centimeter?
A meter is.
Meter is longer than centimeter.
That's right. Now I ask you this.
Ask him that.
No, ask you
I'm
this.
not the
Ask
dude.
you
I'm not
that.
the dude.
I ask you this.
Where's your ruler?
I have a
You
ruler.
don't have a ruler?
What do you want me to do? Just go. I don't have a goddamn ruler.
That doesn't surprise me. A lot of people don't even know what a centimeter is.
That's insane. I think you were going to say that a lot of people don't even have a ruler.
Well, I'll just guess then. They'll be this big, 20
Yeah, yeah.
centimeters.
Okay.
For that was the other species that we were being shown.
This thing is 3 centimeters.
This one might be similar.
Do you think this is going to be bugs? I do.
They look like the sizes.
I think it's gonna be bugs.
or like.
They're going to be like water spiders.
This is a tiger.
You know how terrifying it'd be if tigers had 6 eyes on the top of their head?
Yeah.
No, you're not terrified if.
You're not getting away. What?
Maybe they call it a tiger spider. I don't know. It just looks like a spider to me.
A tiger spider.
Wow.
Ooh.
the
Listen,
sarcopods will
dude,
have
I
a
can
somewhat
tell.
head-like anterior
Have tiger
tagma
claws.
or cephalothorax
Right there.
and a posterior tagma or abdomen. In these
God, if
tidal
all those spikes
swamps,
turn into
coming
nails
onto
on its
land will
arm,
present more opportunities
full
for
on sprint
scavenging
at you?
and predation, so some species of sarcopods may adopt an amphibious lifestyle.
Oh no.
To stay out of water
Alligators?
for longer, the sarcopods will need to
they're
solve the
just
same
small.
problems as the lophostomes, and
Oh.
so may converge on similar solutions,
I think
developing
that
a
would be
tough waterproof integument and adapting their respiratory system for air breathing.
Platypus.
Just like with the lophostomes, the sarcopod's large ventral gill surface will lose water very quickly when exposed to air, and so is likely to be internalized to prevent dehydration, forming a lung-like chamber. Unlike the lophostomes, however, the sarcopods may evolve a mechanism for actively pumping air into and out of this lung to increase respiratory efficiency. The aquatic sarcopods use the constant beating of their 5th pair of limbs, or pleopods, to continuously pass water over the gills for greater oxygen uptake. But in the terrestrial sarcopods, these limbs may also become internalized, where they may atrophy into a set of muscles that allow them to actively inhale and exhale, somewhat analogous to the diaphragm of Earth's vertebrates. This mechanism is much more efficient than simply letting the oxygen diffuse into the lung as the lophostomes
be a
do,
mammal, dude?
and so provides the body with extra energy,
if
meaning
it's
the
anything
size
like the other one,
constraint
it's too
posed by the
small to
atmospheric
do, like,
oxygen levels won't be anywhere
unless
near
they're-
as limiting.
Then which one's going to turn into a mammal? What's going to become the big one? If all of them are too small,
Well,
what's going to
maybe-
take the leap?
Maybe he'll put something where
Episode
it
6.
grow like they absorb something to grow bigger, but it'll be like a
Oh,
bigger
yeah,
size
yeah.
of what they are.
What do you think they absorb to grow bigger?
Photos.
Are we talking growing bigger like as in eating and?
I mean, it would have to.
But then wouldn't that just portray to them themselves, and when they have a baby, wouldn't it just go back to being the small size of the normal species?
Maybe I don't.
They.
I feel like it's more of the environment.
I'll raise my hand.
Okay, what's up?
Yes, food would definitely contribute.
Sure, yeah. I mean, you gain more fat cells.
No,
but,
not just fat cells.
no, but that is the thing. If you have more fat cells, you pass that on to your children. Go on. Go on. Go on, bro.
What?
Go on.
They're evolved.
Why would you said it would contribute?
The
Sure.
more food.
You're telling
it
if
means
the more food, the
more
bigger the
action.
offspring's gonna be.
No.
More action.
More action.
We talking like skateboard flips and stuff.
No.
What are we talking about?
Reproduction.
Reproduction.
More production. More
The bigger
fat.
you are, the hotter the sex. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not
You're
saying
so
that.
weird, bro. You're weird.
We have school.
For full terrestrialization, they may also evolve internal fertilization like the lophostomes, with the gonopods assisting in the transfer of gametes from the male to the female. But instead of laying batches of eggs that are each individually protected by an outer shell, perhaps the female sarcopod protects the fertilized eggs from desiccation by containing them within a leathery sac formed from the lining of her oviduct. This egg sac, or ootheca, may contain dozens of developing young, and will serve as their first meal upon hatching.
This is a
With these
spider.
developments,
It
the
is.
sarcopods are
It
now
works.
able to leave the water behind for
The
good
frog.
and specialize for life on
Could
land.
be a frog.
I
Yeah,
mean,
they
yeah.
did talk about them being amphibians.
Yeah.
The sarcopods are, in a sense, already
That's how I walk.
pre-adapted to terrestrial locomotion thanks to
No
their
bones?
hydrostatic skeleton,
Like, just go
which
in
lends
and-
their body a degree of support. However, beyond a certain size,
Dang.
hydrostatic pressure
Oh,
alone
shit.
won't be enough to
Three-
keep them from collapsing,
God.
and the legs will buckle under the increased weight. One
Snake.
way of dealing with this is to stiffen the limb by evolving permanently inflexible components, so that the limb won't deform as easily and therefore won't need as much muscle power to maintain rigidity. This may begin as filaments of stiffened muscle fibers within the walking legs, which will include the limbs evolved from the 4th, 6th, 7th, and 8th segments. These fibers may then become reinforced with layers of a hardened polymer, becoming a structure similar to the bones of Earth's vertebrates,
Weird bones.
although having evolved along very different lines. The legs will have several joints to allow them to
God.
articulate, while longitudinal muscles around the margins of the hemocoel may ossify to form a limb girdle to which the leg muscles will be anchored. Once the capability to produce this bone-like polymer has evolved, it may get co-opted for other purposes, namely protecting the internal organs. Arguably, the most important part of the body to protect is the brain and the sensory organs, so it's likely a brain case or skull plate may evolve, along with other deposits of bone around the cephalothorax, as well as along the lateral nerve cords that serve as the equivalent of the spinal cord. This skeleton, as well as their efficient respiratory systems, will allow these sarcopods to grow to considerable sizes. By the time the sarcopods come
5
onto
meters.
land, the lophostomes will have already occupied the majority of the
They're bigger
available
than the
niches,
lophostome.
but the sarcopod's size advantage will give them access to megafaunal niches that the lophostomes are excluded from. To further specialize for attaining large sizes, they'll need to evolve a more efficient cardiovascular system, as extra weight puts more pressure on circulation. The hemocoel used to function as both the hydrostatic skeleton and the circulatory system, but now that the role of structural support is taken up by a true endoskeleton, the hemocoel can now evolve into a closed circulatory system. in which blood is moved continuously through a series of vessels to ensure a constant flow of oxygen to every cell in the body.
Dude, that thing
The
gets
ancestral
4 feet
polypod pumped
long.
blood through the hemocoel by contracting wings of muscle within each of its
How
segments.
long is that in centimeters?
Man, it just said
It's
1.5.
centimeters. It was meters, so it's centimeters, meters, and inches.
It's 1.5 meters.
What? A centimeter is 1.5 meters?
Oh my god. No, this thing is 1.5 meters, which equals almost
But
5
as these
feet.
terrestrial sarcopods grow
And how
larger,
many centimeters is what I asked? You said it was 1.5 meters. How many centimeters is that? Is that all I'm
How much
asking?
centimeters?
Yeah.
150.
Thank you. Jeez. Ah.
You may continue.
the contractive muscles within the abdomen may fuse into a single dedicated heart. The new circulatory system will also need to have a filtering mechanism to prevent the buildup of metabolic waste products and toxins in the blood. Each of the segments of the ancestral polypod may have had a pair
They
of
all become
nephridia,
Americans?
or glands involved in blood filtration, which may survive in these terrestrial forms as a series of kidney-like organs within the abdomen.
Or
Their digestive system may also undergo some changes as well. The simple gastrointestinal tract of the ancestral polypod may develop a foregut or gizzard within the cephalothorax, lined with rasping teeth or plates to grind down swallowed food, and a second, larger stomach may occur within the abdomen, along with organs that supply enzymes to aid in digestion. The anterior limbs on their cephalothorax may now specialize to aid in feeding on their new, much more varied diet. The first two pairs of limbs, once used for sifting through sand for detritus, may now become mandibles to process food and pass it into the mouth, with the setae on these limbs becoming tooth-like cutting surfaces. The third pair of limbs may become pedipalps, which may have a role in both handling food items as well as sensing the environment. The tips of these pedipalps may contain chemical receptors to smell and taste food before it's ingested, and the setae on these limbs, used in the marine sarcopods to sense vibrations, may now specialize into a hearing mechanism. Speaking of senses, since air is constantly being drawn into the lungs, a ring of olfactory receptors around their spiracles will help detect scents carried on the breeze, thus giving their sense of smell a much greater range. These sarcopods are now adapted to a fully terrestrial existence, and are poised to exploit the as-of-yet vacant megafaunal niches. I'll call this clade the osteopods.
Bone legs.
Together with the chemophytes and lophostomes, they'll serve as the blueprint for innumerable
These are
land-dwelling lineages
3-starter
to come.
Pokemons. Pick one.
It will have taken about 100 million years to gain a foothold on land,
Pick up the tree.
but now they're fully equipped to populate the nascent
Maybe the
terrestrial
dominant one.
ecosystems. In the next episode, we'll see how these pioneering land dwellers
one on the
undergo
right.
an explosion of diversity into a myriad of new clades.
Wow. That was a good one.
yeah,
Wow, that was a real good one, guys.
I was right about the plants.
Yeah.
Yeah. They came from seeds
Oh.
because birds pooped them out.
I thought you were pointing at something else.
Wow, man, that was a real fun one. I love seeing how they take like things such as the limbs, and then when they go to evolve them, they turn them into something else. I love how they did that. And again, shouts out to Biblaridion. My man's did this before ChatGPT. Bro, smart. Bro thought of it all on his own or with the help of people. They did it though. Humans are fantastic, right?
Better than some AI.
Better than some AI. Well, more creative than some AI.
You don't have an IQ lower than 80.
I think he found this video in a bird poop.
This video was in bird poop.
And it was born.
He found the idea of this
Back
video
to
with bird poop.
Yeah.
It grew into a redwood tree.
Yeah.
That's cool.
That was heat
It
though.
was really cool.
That's so good.
Okay, we're really sorry that it took so long to get this next part out, but
Yeah.
As you see, it's about 40 minutes long.
yeah,
Yeah, these tend to get long.
they do.
But 40
Especially with-
minutes?
I don't know.
That's 15 minutes of talking.
Yeah, it is.
Yep.
That's pretty thick.
We
huh?
were talking about trees.
Which
Yeah.
was relevant
Yeah.
to the situation.
It
Which
was completely
you were correct. The Mundo.
perfect.
Granted, they haven't developed seeds yet, so they're not real trees.
They're not trees yet.
They're gonna become trees.
They're still flesh.
Flesh. It's crazy.
Weirdos. Anyway, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like, comment, and subscribe. And let us know if there's any other types of videos you want us to check out. Could be more Alien Biospheres, which we're already going to do. It could be whatever. Just leave it down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. We have been Cranky Films. Boys.
Stay cranky.
Oh.
You just said it.
Stay cranky.
Yeah, well, it's still me. I still have to say it. Stay cranky.